Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today we want to return to the subject of Synology's 2025 refreshes of a number of their different product lines. At the time of recording, this is about a day and a half since I made my initial video showing some of the, I'm not going to say leaked, but I'm going to say shared images from an event, an official Synology event that took place over in the East, detailing a lot of some of their intended refreshes occurring throughout the first half of 2025. Again, I've linked towards that video below, and of course to the resources that we found online. Again, thanks massively to those users that shared that information with me, but also the ones that shared those photos on those different forums and blogs, because let's face it, they aren't doing it for money, they're doing it because they like sharing that information, and it was really good that we all got to learn about those product releases. So again, link below, check them out. Now, this video is one I alluded to at the end of my previous video. I wanted to find out your feedback on this. I took to Reddit, I took to the YouTube comments, I took to social media, and basically petitioned and asked people to share their thoughts and opinions on the refresh lineup there. Now, it ended up aggregating to about 800 comments there across different social media platforms, across YouTube and Reddit. And this video is about discussing a lot of the kind of hot button topics for a lot of you that were covered. But before we go any further, a few little bits of housekeeping. Number one, I'm not really going to be talking about comments that could be boiled down to the simple expression hardware, product. I'm not going to cover any of that stuff because I wanted to talk about this as a complete solution. So don't get me wrong, it would be very easy to make a video covering a lot of those comments, but we have to be a little bit nuanced about what we're seeing here. Next up, and almost certainly you're thinking it based on what I just said, is Synology paying for this video? No, they would never pay for this video. They've never paid for any of the videos I have made. All of these videos about Synology have always been made with no sponsorship from Synology, and all of the opinions in this video, well, they're mine, but they're also yours. They're your comments, and throughout the course of this video, you're going to be seeing comments from all of the platforms I mentioned earlier on screen. I'll try and name check a few users along the way and link towards some of them in the comments, but ultimately, this is your opinion, my opinion. This is not Synology's opinion. And lastly, if you've not already gathered, this is going to be a real jibber jabber of a video. There's not going to be a huge amount of interesting stuff I can put on screen. So alongside listening to me for a huge period of time, look at that time bar at the bottom, you're also going to be hearing the odd bit of AI voiceover to break things up when I read some of the comments out. I do it so you don't have to hear my voice, but also to make it abundantly clear that this is not my voice. It is someone else's and their opinion. So do keep that in mind. But without further ado, again, jibber jabber aside, let's crack on.
Putting things in perspective, for people who prefer a turnkey product that works consistently, spending their time better than tinkering for hours and having support when they need it, Synology still rules despite being consistently behind on hardware. DSM is the king of the hill hands down, and they know it. Maybe in 5-10 years, if Ugreen puts the resources into their OS or potentially Minisrum, and they manage to stay as safe as Synology, they may beat Synology on their turf while Synology is asleep at the wheel. But realistically, QNAP has been around for over 20 years and never managed to really be much of a threat to Synology. For those who really need horsepower, running application on a mini PC is a much better option than a NAS anyway. A NAS was meant to be a power-efficient file server, less so an application server, that can transcode 10 8K streams at once, or run an AI agent. It's cool enough it can handle your video surveillance, run an Office suite, chat applications, be an email server and much more. While the upgrades are very disappointing, no doubt, I'm still going for it, as I need to, but when it is time to upgrade again in 8-10 years, maybe the market will be different if they keep not listening, and if the other players put together a strong OS and application suite.
Now, one of the main reasons that I petitioned for people's opinion on the Synology Reddit was because I wanted it to come from people that were already, if not already, and currently invested in the Synology product solution system, then at the very least had a hand in it at one point or another. It's important to be looking at this from Synology's own user base because Synology likes to keep people in its ecosystem, no doubt. Now, for a lot of those users, it came really down to two different camps. One, these upgrades, these refreshes, these new lines are not suitable for their growing needs, or that people were looking at these as turnkey solutions. These were solutions that were there to do a job.
Here's my contrarian opinion on the old CPU discussion. First, we need to agree that a NAS is an appliance. An appliance is a box designed to be easy to use, do a number of tasks, without actually knowing what's inside. If we buy a dishwasher, we don't care what kind of CPU runs the cleaning cycle. We only care about the result, clean dishes. If you consider the NAS as being an appliance, all we need to do is check if it's doing the tasks it needs to do adequately. You shouldn't care about the CPU inside. A good comparison is the new Google Streamer. It too is an appliance. Most tech reviewers complained that it uses a totally outdated CPU. I bought one and the user interface is very responsive and streaming 4K video really works well. The tech reviews about the old CPU are irrelevant to the users. The streamer works well and does what it was designed to do. Technology people care too much about the technology and never ask the question if something is simply good enough.
Realistically, a lot of users that were not impressed by the hardware choices present in these 2025 refreshes were probably not overly impressed with the last 3 to 5 years of Synology hardware within these particular products. And there's a kernel of truth in that. A lot of other hardware vendors in the NAS space have been rocking out greater hardware almost every 1 to 2 years since 2020, and Synology have been quite restrained in their hardware choices there. Now, that isn't to defend them or attack them for that. It's just simply that it's become abundantly clear that Synology's priorities towards hardware have dramatically slowed down versus their priorities towards software. Now, if you take a good look over the solutions that were detailed in this 2025 refresh list, there's been about 9 to 10 actual standalone hardware solutions, a few media and memory upgrade modules. But this refresh, the two big changes are upgrading from 1 gigabit Ethernet ports to 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports in most cases, and upgrading toward the CPU inside a number of these systems. Now, upgrade is something we're going to have to debate there. If we look at the CPU choices, and we'll return to this subject later on, in many cases it was a case of moving from a dual-core CPU into a quad-core CPU within the same product family. Again, not all of them. We'll get onto that one at the end of the video. But when it came to the 2.5 gigabit interface upgrades, as mentioned in my previous video, 2.5 gig NICs as the standard has kind of been the thing with every other vendor since 2020, and Synology have never engaged with 2.5 GBE outside of its routers ever, just ever. 1 gig and failover in between all the way up to 10 gig, but no 2.5 gig fixed. And bringing my own opinion back into the fold, I will say that as long as these solutions are comparable, and by comparable I mean pretty much near enough identical, factoring in inflation, to the previous generations for each scaled device, 2.5 GBE upgrades on these for me is a good thing. I'm glad Synology have done it. I wish they'd done it sooner, and as long as it doesn't inflate or increase the price on these devices, I'm still pleased to see 2.5 gigabit Ethernet there on there. I know I don't represent everyone's opinion, and there are users out there that think Synology should have just slammed 10 GBE as standard, but still nonetheless, I'm pleased about the presence of 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, and I would argue the quad-core AMD Ryzen, the V1500B, that's going to be present on the 4 and the 5 bay device, the 925 Plus and the 1525 Plus. I'm pleased to see that there, given those devices have long since been reprofiled away from multimedia and more towards faster file processing there, and taking advantage of Docker containers and kind of larger database use. It could also be argued that this isn't the first time Synology have rejigged their CPU portfolio and took a CPU from a higher tier and brought it into a slightly lower tier. We saw them do it previously with their SMB series of devices. Hell, we saw it with their Value series, with ARM-based processors that 1 year were considered higher in the profile and portfolio that were just brought down. We've seen it with quad-core CPUs replacing previous generation dual-core CPUs, and again this extends to Intel Celeron processors, AMD Ryzen processors and more. So again, we aren't hugely surprised by the way Synology have approached some of their hardware choices here, and again, as long as they maintain that price point for me, I'm okay with it, I think. And further to that, there's another really good Reddit post, again, I'll link to it in the comments below, just labelled, "Is Synology on a downward trend?" And as, charged as a statement as that is, it's a really, really good discussion about where Synology is versus that of their competitors. Also, several users raised arguably a very strong point that these devices from Synology, as they're refreshes of existing product families, these aren't like iPhones where you've got your iPhone 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, whatever. These are not devices that people are going to buy year on year. Realistically, a Synology DS925 Plus is not targeting DS923 Plus users. It's targeting users who purchased their previous Synology 5, 7, 8, 10 years ago. And there are plenty of users who are still utilizing Synology NAS devices from 2010, 2013, even 2015, who are now looking at these. And as again, coming back to that comparable price point, they're looking at these as suitable upgrade to their existing system without drastically improving or increasing the cost of the system they bought upwards of a decade ago against the price of it now.
I'll take an unpopular stance. Unless they restrict the new units to Synology-only drives, which may be a showstopper as I won't be able to just transfer my current disk array into the new unit, I'll likely be upgrading my trusty DS1512 Plus to the DS1525 Plus. For me, Synology gives the rock-solid reliability in hardware and software that I need. The two 5GB ports will be welcome, but I won't need one 0GB anytime soon. The new processor will also be sufficient for my needs for quite a while. The additional memory will be great as well as catching. Clearly I'm not a power user, but there are probably more people and businesses like me out there than there are power users who might need the latest and greatest. Not everybody needs or wants a Lamborghini when an ultra-reliable Toyota will do them just fine.
I see your point. Not everyone needs something fast or fancy. But my massive issue with Synology is that they are charging Lamborghini money for a beat-out 2005 Toyota Yaris and telling you that you can only run R10L petrol in it unless you want a flashing red light in your dash.
Now, all that said, something that I covered in the previous video was to do with Synology's 10G upgrade card. Currently, you can utilize this on 4 different devices in the existing Synology lineup. This is the 93 Plus, the 1522 Plus, the 723 Plus, and the RS422 Plus, giving users the ability to add 10GBE in a very convenient fashion there. And again, early slides that were shared on the websites I mentioned at the beginning did show comparable tables that showed the older or the current generation and the intended refresh with a line struck through this device being supported. Now, it's still not concrete whether those refresh devices, whenever it is that they arrive, will support this or not. The slides seemingly indicate it won't be available, but it's still not concrete. So, until that is 100% confirmed, whenever these refreshes arrive, for now, add a little bit of doubt or a TBC as to whether you will be completely excluded from using an easy 10G upgrade on these systems. But returning to the feedback, one consistent returning trend was users comparing these Synology refreshes against that of alternatives in the market. I mean, hell, this website, this YouTube channel is called NAS Compares. I'm going to make comparisons too. But it has to be said that, and I mentioned this in the comments a few times, comparing Synology solutions with the likes of GMK Tech, Topton, CWWK, Minisforum, and more isn't a fair comparison because we are comparing a turnkey NAS solution that is a combined hardware, software featured solution versus that is comparably DIY. The hardware is pre-built, but you still have to use your own software, install it, and you don't have a lot of the bells, whistles, apps, client tools, and support options that a turnkey NAS solution includes as part of its overarching purchased package there. However, we have to make comparisons against QNAP, against AcerStore, against TerraMaster, against Ugreen, ZimmerQ, all of those turnkey NAS solutions that can provide either the same or a comparable solution of hardware and software. And in that world, time and time again in the comments, the same wall was being hit for a lot of users. And that was, if you're only in it for the hardware, there are better options in the market right now. But as a combined solution and as a software solution with DSM, active backup on its own, hugely appealing for a lot of users, surveillance station and more, The brand QNAP is still not quite there. Ugreen is still, as the name suggests, green. Too green for many users. TerraMaster for some users feels inconsistent. ZimmerCube doesn't feel very feature rich. The list goes on and on. And as far as a lot of users are concerned that are still in the Synology ecosystem, what they would lose in terms of software support by moving to a third-party brand may just be too high a price. Synology Office, Active Backup, Surveillance Station, SHR. Again, there are things close to this on other platforms, but nowhere near complete. Keep in mind, that's not me championing Synology over all those other brands uniformly. Again, these are a lot of other users' comments. We've made countless videos here on the channel where we have compared Synology products with those of third-party turnkey solutions, and the results have swung in different directions with different comparisons. But if you are already heavily invested, be it professionally or personally, in Synology's ecosystem, it is really not that easy to just step out onto greener pastures, because some of those features are just locked in within that platform. And taking a quick sideline here, one consistent trend right now is to do with users that have entered into the Synology ecosystem with a recent purchase and having found out that there is intended refreshes of a number of lines, including the one they've just purchased, happening in the first half of 2025. They're wondering, should they send it back? Do they still keep hold of it? What should they do? And although this has been addressed by lots of other users in the comments, for me personally, if you've already bought the latest generation system from Synology, really, you're not going to be missing out a tremendous amount in the new refreshed box there. Arguably, the device you've got, the only main benefit in most cases above 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports, and still awaiting confirmation on that adapter. I would argue that all you're missing out on if you wait 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 months, and again, we still don't have confirmation of these refresh timeframes, you might save in terms of money if the older generation drops in price, barely 5 to 10%. And that time that you are not having a NAS, again, what is your data doing, and does your existing setup work for you? You chose to upgrade for a reason. In almost every case, anyone that has purchased a new Synology NAS now and are wondering whether the NAS they've got will be better or worse than the refresh, in most cases, I'd stick with what you've got there, because the increases in improvements between each of these refreshes is so small, something we talked about earlier on, that you're already kind of where you need to be. But just factor in that upgrade flexibility on the new and indeed current generation is debatable. But easily, there were two consistent, regular concerns from most users. And that was, number one, to do with hard drive and SSD compatibility, and the other one was to do with that Intel Celeron processor. We're just going to pop that one back here for now. We wanted to cover everything before I got to these 2 points, because these are going to be such detrimentally divisive topics that we need to kind of really dig into them. And I wanted to do my due diligence before we rolled around in the mud. Now, Synology, as mentioned in the previous video, has been somewhat restrained about the hard drives and SSDs they've chose to allow on their compatibility listings on their pages. And there is growing concerns, and again, I'll say right now, we've had no solid confirmation either one way or the other that Synology will continue to minimize supported drives on their platforms and potentially roll out pre-populated devices there. Whether they do that, I'm not sure. But I will say, I don't think it's completely out of the question that Synology would continue to reduce supported hard drives and SSDs on their systems. I also think it is wildly unlikely that they'll allow, in this newer generation, third-party SSDs for storage pools on their systems. In fact, I've got question marks about SSD compatibility for things like SSD caching on the next generation there. Synology have been trying to make themselves as leaner and as efficient as possible within their business model, for good or for bad, depending on your perspective. And I do think a big part of that support is going to be minimizing the variables of storage media used in their systems, again, for good or for bad. But I think a lot of users, right now, the hardware inside the NAS isn't for, their biggest barrier. If you go through those comments, you can find by several, I mean loads of people that just want to know, can they use their own drives? Can they use SSDs for their own needs? What are the compatibility hurdles? Which brings me to that other hot button issue, that CPU. Now, I'm not going to mince words. The Synology arriving, once again, if what we've seen on these slides is 100% confirmed, you know, devil's advocate, if it is the J4125 Celeron processor, that is horrendous. Everything I've said up to this point, whether it's your opinion or mine, I think we've tried to be as balanced as possible about this. Whether it is that these systems are refresh systems, so we're not looking iPhone 1, 2, 3, 4, we're looking at users that purchased 5 to 10 years ago. You know, we've tried to be as balanced as we can, but there is no denying that rocking out a system in 2025 with a CPU that I believe first debuted in 2019, that Intel themselves no longer support, I think is Synology missing the mark. I genuinely believe that. When it comes to the AMD Ryzen processors, I think there is an argument to be made. Given that AMD have a 10-year support cycle on those CPUs, Synology sticking with those processors, knowing that AMD will continue to support it with fixes, support it in terms of efficiency and capabilities, allows Synology to know that the hardware platform they're utilizing will not have a great deal of change during their own development. And although I think there are question marks that I'll come round to about support cycles on these processors between ranges, I do think there is an argument for Synology to continue using the AMD Ryzen processor in the 2025 generation, even though there were devices released in 2020, like the DS1621 Plus, that had the same CPU here. However, the Intel Celeron J4125 is a CPU that no one is using. And I know there is an argument a lot of users don't care what's going on under the bonnet, they just want it to do its job. That's all fair and well, but older CPUs that aren't supported by the original manufacturers to this extent rolling out in 2025, it's not even a cost thing for me. It's not even a value thing. It's a capability thing. This is a comparatively ancient Gen 2 CPU in a Gen 3, Gen 4, Gen 5 world. I didn't expect Synology to stick a Gen 4 or Gen 5 CPU inside this system. No one would. It would rise the price. But there are plenty of Gen 3 options in the market. There are plenty of affordable CPUs in the market, like the N100 and the N305, the previous generation Alder Lake processors, that are affordable. And whether it is a Synology retooling production or Synology recalibrating their software development, you know, they'll have to tell us. But this CPU, the J4125, it's not on. And that's really the only thing about these refreshes that I can personally say I am affronted by. Everything else about it makes sense within the Synology model. It makes sense within their rhetoric. It makes sense within their software and efficiency. And in almost every other way, if I don't like something about these Synology refreshes, I can see it's justifiable. I can see the logic, and I can see why it might not be for me. It can be for someone else. I get it. But nevertheless, there is something about a new generation of Synology NASes arriving with hardware that they were already using 5 years ago in their solutions that I'm not happy with. One of the main reasons I'm not happy about it isn't anything to do with value either. The thing that bothers me is, let's take that 1621 Plus I mentioned earlier on that was still listed on Synology's website. That was released in 2020 with the V1500B CPU there from AMD. Now, in 10 years, are Synology going to continue to support firmware updates for DSM 8, 9 or whatever on this system in 10 years' time? And in 10 years' time, given the 1621 Plus will have nearly identical hardware to that of the 2025 release systems with the same CPU, is there going to be a moment in 2030 to 2035 where both products will be taken as end of support at the same time? I know a big part of this is Synology's profiling of SMB solutions, prosumer and more, but I don't like the idea that there are CPUs in some devices, and of course the Celeron I include here, where the end of production life and the end of more likely software support life on a product, and you can go to Synology's own product support pages to see full, limited or complete EOL support of OS updates on their system. I don't like the idea that we can have solutions released 5 years apart with the same hardware, but this solution might have its software support canned and this one won't. That to me is a conscious choice and not a necessity. That's why the CPU thing bothers me as much as it does. But let's hit the brakes there. It's barely been a day and a half since my other video, and I'm sure there are other things to think about. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Realistically, I don't think everyone's going to agree with things I've said in this video, but please keep in mind, one, this is your and my perspective here shown on this. None of this has been Synology's point of view, and maybe Synology will reach out to us in reply for this video, but I do still think it's a solid product. I do still think Synology DSM is the de facto best turnkey NAS solution in the market right now. It's not for everyone, but I do think right now they're still the gold standard. Let me know if you disagree or agree. I'm sure you will in the comments. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.